you can tell from the title of this presentation, it's really about challenging some of the things that we say to ourselves that cause us to think that we should be more than we are and can be. And that's something that happens to all of us in different times of our lives in different parts, but I think happens very intently and intensely when we are caregiving. So we're going to just go through some things. I hope by the end of the evening, there are one or two things that really stood out for you, things that will just help you to shape your world a little differently and maybe give yourself a little more grace. That would be my hope as we go through this. And now well, that's very odd. So I was just saying the thing I worry most about is not getting the thing to work. There we go. It decided it would. So congratulations. Why? Because you're here. Really? You know, I realize that when you're a caregiver, being here even electronically is no small feat. You had to do things to get here. You had to change things to get here. You had to make a decision to get here. You're here because of things you can't control. Nobody wakes up one morning and says to themselves, you know, what I'd really like to do is be a caregiver to somebody I love who can no longer do the things they used to do. That would be my fondest hope and wish. But for many of us, in whatever form, we wake up because of the love and commitments we have, and life has changed. And we need to do things differently. And it's happened because of things we can't control, because if we could, we'd change them. But you're also here because of things you can control. And you're here because you made a choice. Because in the midst of things going out of our control, there are always choices we can make. And so that's one of the things to recognize is no. You never said about 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago to say, I want to be at a presentation on being a caregiver. But you did make the choices in the last few days or weeks to sign up, to get things organized, and to be here. And I hope you feel good about that because that's a very positive thing. One of the things we deal with all our lives is the whole idea of who I should be versus who I am. It happens to us in all sorts of settings, but the higher the stress level that we are under, I think the greater it becomes. And I want you to really pay attention to the word should. Who I should be. Those are the things we tell ourselves. Those are the things that we have internalized either by messages from our upbringing, from the people around us, by who we are internally. This is who I should be. And so often we come up against who we think we should be and who we actually are. And it causes us often a great deal of distress when the two don't match up as we would like them to. So I want you to think about this. We cannot change what we will not acknowledge. So part of what happens when we have a lot of shoulds in our brains that translate into our lives is that we find that there are things we think we shouldn't be thinking, we shouldn't be saying, or we don't know who to say them to, or we don't really want to acknowledge them to ourselves. My background is in counseling and chaplaincy, and I can tell you one of the things that the people I've worked with over the years have taught me very clearly is that if we will not acknowledge what's there, it's impossible to change what we pretend doesn't exist. We might want things to be different, but first we have to acknowledge what's actually taking place. We have to learn to be honest with ourselves as well as with others. Another thing, and this is sometimes a misconception, is that talking about feelings does not make them bigger or worse. When we have really intense feelings, there is a bit of a tendency for us, because they feel like they're explosive, to think that if I don't think about them, and if I don't talk about them, then they'll stay somewhere hidden in the background. But if I start talking about them, it stirs up a lot of stuff that I'm very unsure of. And it starts to feel like it's just going to blast out and explode. And so the better thing to do is to just not think about it at all. However, part of what happens with that is it only works for a while. And I don't know, some of you, baby, my age and old enough to remember, there was an old Bugs Bunny cartoon where I think it was a worm coming up from the ground, but the cartoon character was determined to keep that worm down, and they would start by placing one hand on a hole, and then they placed the other hand there, and then eventually they placed their feet, and soon their whole body was involved in trying to keep this thing from surfacing. It was kind of like a weird game of whack-a-mole, where you just frantically try to keep things down. When we don't acknowledge the things that are so tightly held within us, what starts to happen is more and more and more of ourselves comes into holding it down, and less of ourselves are available for other things. So that fear we feel that if I touch this, if I get to it, it's going to explode and it will be way bigger. It's real because when we've avoided it, it looks and feels very scary. But the reality is that when feelings have a place to go, it doesn't make them bigger. It eventually allows us to find out how we can manage them. Then there's the what will my friends, family, or community think? We'd all like to think that we aren't very bothered by that, but most of us are. I'd say all of us are. It's a part of how we live. And to some degree, it's not bad to have some of those things surrounding us, but it can become a real trap. And I do know that one of the things that I have observed over the years, whether it's dealing with a terminal illness, whether it's dealing with issues of dementia, anything that causes stress in a family, there will be somebody or some people around who will try to tell you how you should manage it in a way that tries to calm their fears, but doesn't do a lot for you. I think the reason for that is because we all want to think that bad things won't happen to us. And so if we can just tell people how they should handle things, it means we're never going to be in that position. And so some of the things that are coming back from friends and even family or from your community, if they're negative and if they're stressing you and if people are giving you the idea you're not doing a good job, remind yourself it's coming from their place of fear. And it will help you be a little more able to let it fall back and not take it and internalize it and think you should be exactly who they determine you are. When we try to be who others think we should be, it's not only counterproductive, it is absolutely exhausting. And it's exhausting because we're going to get a bunch of different messages, some of which will not match up well at all. And after a while, we're exhausted just trying to be the person that we're being told our partner that we're caring for needs. I experienced this not because I was a caretaker for somebody with memory issues, but because I was a caretaker for somebody with cancer. And what I found was very well-meaning people would come and give us a bunch of advice about things. And I just remember one day, and the people giving the advice, I absolutely know it was coming from a place of caring. It was their experience. They wanted us to know, but the more they talked, the more terrified I became that I was not going to be able to do all these things that they were telling me my husband needed me to do for us to navigate the difficult place we were in. And I had to go back later and I had to just say, you know what, I'm going to take the caring out of that, but I'm going to ignore the advice because it doesn't fit for us. It's not who we are. It's not who I am. This is not what I have to offer here. Not easy. So I want you to think about this and finish this sentence. And maybe if you want to, you can type in some answers and we'll get them read out. I want you to finish the sentence that says, if I care, I will da 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 da. What are your answers? How would you finish that sentence?
If I care, I will visit more often.
Mm-hmm. If I care, I will visit more often.
If I care, I will be there.
I will be there. And in our heads, often translated into I'll be there indefinitely, always, etc.
If I care, I will have more compassion.
More compassion, yes.
Yeah. I will not be grouchy.
Not grouchy.
If I care, I will do my very best.
Do my best. So we all have answers to that in our heads, right? If I care, I will. So I'm going to answer that just a little differently. I'm going to give you some answers to that might not be the ones that came to your minds, but I want you to think about them and see what you can find that will fit for you. So I'm going to answer this question in the following way. If I care, I will. Have a computer that doesn't stop doing this. If I care, I will reframe. So in counseling circles, and this is probably an old term because I've been around for a long time, but the idea of reframing is one of my favorites, because in life, we will have a certain perspective. And as that perspective locks in, sometimes what we need to do is we need to find a way to just shift the picture a little bit and bring it into focus in a little bit of a different way. And so reframing is the ability to look at an old problem in a new way. So if I care, I'm going to find some different ways to look at what's going on. Because when we are stressed, we have tunnel vision. And it's a natural response, because whenever we are stressed, we take all our energy and we focus it on where we believe it's needed most. And so some of the times, if we're relaxed and standing back, we can see a bigger picture. But when we're stressed, we just don't have that in us. And we become very focused on these things that we're so determined we should be. And we don't have the ability to see beyond the present moment. But hopefully part of this presentation will help you reframe just a little bit. Just take a little of the pressure off and change the picture ever so slightly so that you can see caregiving in a different way. And you're right. That is much easier said than done. If it was simple, we would do it all the time and we would do it immediately. But the fact that it's not easy doesn't make it unimportant. It just means we need to maybe focus on it a little bit. Here's another one for you to think about. An ideal caregiver would not. So this was, the past was they would. Let's look at what an ideal caregiver would not. And let's do it according to an ideal caregiver. Oh, sometimes I'm not sure if it's because I'm of some of the stuff coming in, but it's locking every now and then. Okay. An ideal caregiver would not feel what? If you're an ideal caregiver, the perfect caregiver would not feel
unloved.
Would not feel unloved. They would have that confidence all the time.
Frustrated, anger,
they wouldn't feel angry, frustrated, resentful,
guilty, avoidance.
An ideal caregiver would never avoid doing things.
Overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they'd never feel those things. An ideal caregiver would never do what? They would never yell. They would never say things they wish they hadn't said.
Scream.
Make my mom feel guilty.
Oh, yes, they would never make the person feel guilty.
Cry.
Okay, and then an ideal caregiver would never need what?
Help.
They would never need help because they're the ideal caregiver. They can do it all the time.
Gratitude. Time off. Attention.
Oh, yeah. They would never need a thank you. They would never need recognition. They would never need time off because they do it from love, and therefore they just can continue to give and give and give without needing anything back. If you're hearing a little tiny bit of mild sarcasm in my voice, that's deliberate. And it's deliberate just because sometimes when we speak it aloud, and it's not to make fun of you, absolutely not. I see myself in 98% of these things. It's because sometimes when we speak it aloud, or when somebody else speaks it back to us, we hear that it's actually not doable. That what we carry internally as the ideal that we are trying to live up to is something that is not doable. We would never need that. And when we say it, it kind of catches us and we think, oh yeah, maybe it's not what I think. So I want you to look at this list. This is the world of real caregivers. So we talked about what our ideals are. Let's take a look at what a real caregiver is. Just take a minute and read those words. So what you probably noticed reading through my list of real caregivers is that there's some things that you would be happy to acknowledge as you, and there's a few things that you'd rather not acknowledge as you. And they'll be different for each of you. But I made this list quite deliberately because I was thinking of people I know, and they are real caregivers, and they are wonderful people, and they are all of the things listed, both positively and negatively, because that is who people are. The ideal does not exist. So I want you to think about this. I want you to give yourself permission to feel the things that we're going to talk about next. First of all, I want you to give yourself permission to feel ambivalent. Feeling ambivalent is holding two seemingly different and not coexistent feelings at the same time. It's something we actually do all the time, but we may find it hard to admit we do because they don't feel like they should fit together. So you might feel both. This is a huge privilege. Caring for this person is a huge privilege. I'm so glad I'm here for them. And how on earth did this get to be my life? Those things can be held simultaneously, and they're both very real because they're pulling at different parts of you. They're pulling at the part of you that truly cares and truly wants to be the best caregiver you can be, and the part of you that doesn't even recognize what the day looks like anymore. You have to acknowledge that you can hold these things, and it's perfectly normal to do so. You're not a weird person who has split into two. You are a very normal person who is under a great deal of stress. And we hold two things at once when that happens. But the reason it's important to know that we can have ambivalent feelings and that it's normal and that it's not because we're not the perfect caregiver, acknowledging that is a little bit like the steam valve on a pressure cooker. So when I was a kid, pressure cookers were a big thing. And I remember my mom actually cooking potatoes in the old one. And then they disappeared for a while and they have resurfaced and have become immensely popular. But one of the things I loved as a kid was when my mom used the pressure cooker. I loved when it came time to flip the thing and watch all the steam come out, because I just thought it was the neatest thing. And I was always rather intrigued by the idea that all of this had been held in that pot and now it was going into the air. Being able to acknowledge the ambivalent feelings we hold is a little bit like being able to just let the steam out of a pressure cooker. It gives us an out. It allows us to be honest about stuff that is actually confusing to say, and sometimes even a bit confusing to try to tell people. But getting it out does a couple of things. First of all, it gives us permission to feel it, but when we have permission to feel it, it sometimes opens it up for people around us to be able to express those feelings as well. It's interesting, isn't it? When somebody is able to articulate something that we've been feeling but didn't know how to say, sometimes it's very permission giving. A few years ago, actually many years ago now, we were at a church retreat. My kids were quite a bit younger. I think my oldest was probably 11 or 12. And at this church retreat, we decided as one of our icebreakers that we were going to tell embarrassing stories. We divided into groups and we had everybody share embarrassing stories with their group. And the rules were it had to be true and it had to have happened to you. You couldn't tell somebody else's embarrassing story. And then we chose the best ones and we had them told to the whole group. And quite naturally, people chose things that were funny and strange. And we had a great time. Actually, we laughed a lot. And it was a few hours later, we were at the campfire. And I was just kind of watching him, and my daughter and some of her friends were standing around, some of the kids from the youth group. And all of a sudden, one of them started telling an embarrassing story, something that had happened to them, and everybody had a good laugh. And then somebody else picked it up. And I watched them and I looked at their age and I thought, isn't that interesting? This would not have been their conversation normally around the campfire. They were in the age where you're trying very hard to appear like you have everything together. And embarrassing stories are not things you tell readily. But they had just watched a whole group of adults tell their embarrassing stories and accept each other and laugh with each other and have a great time. And it freed them to do it. It was kind of an unintended consequence of that, but a really good reminder that when we share some of the things that are hidden inside of us, it gives somebody else permission. So it's something that's good for you, and it's also good for those around you. Give yourself permission to feel impatience. Somebody listed impatience earlier, something that a good caregiver would never be. Absolutely, you need to give yourself permission for this. You need to give yourself permission to be impatient with the person you're caring for. How on earth can it take so long to get ready to leave the house? We used to get 3 kids ready for school in 30 minutes and be out the door. And now we're trying to get to an appointment. We can barely get out the door. How can they not understand what I'm saying to them? How is that possible? How can I say the same thing over and over and over and over? And then you need to give yourself permission to feel impatient with yourself. How can I not know how hard it is for them? How can I not acknowledge that? How can someone else be so much better at dealing with them than I am? Oh, this is a real kicker, isn't it? There's something about watching somebody that we have just felt deeply impatient with, that we love more than life itself, being dealt with by somebody else who not only seems to get them, but seems to totally and completely enjoy them. There's a reason for that. The reason for that is that the person who can do this is not looking at this person with all of the things that you carry. They're not seeing the person who has changed. They're seeing the person who is. And it's easier for them to respond to the person who is. A very good friend of mine who worked in personal care from when she was in her early 20s until she retired was very, very good at sitting down with people and just having a conversation that went wherever they needed it to go. She had discovered that that was less stressful for them. She discovered she enjoyed it. And when she had time, she would sit down and she would just let the conversation flow, and they both leave feeling happier. In the past several years, she has been helping her mom, who has severe memory issues. And, she talks about just how much harder it is to do that with her, even though she can pull out that skill. But because she didn't have that same history with those other people, it was important for her to do it, and she could do it better. So when somebody else is better at dealing with the people that we are caregiving for, that we so deeply love, they're better at it than we are. There are a lot of reasons for that. And if we can, we need to just say, that's great. They're both having a good time. I'm going to learn what I can from this, and I'm going to let the rest go. Our initial reaction, at least mine would be, is often, how come I can't do that? But it's a very different thing. You need to give yourself permission to feel jealousy. It's going to be there. You're going to be jealous of the people who have the life you've lost. Seeing people who are doing the things that maybe you thought you'd be doing at this point. It is very normal to feel that tug, to just wonder about what might have been. It's easy to be jealous of people who seem to have things better than you do. It's easy to be jealous of people with siblings or without siblings. And this comes because I've talked to people who say, oh my goodness, I wish that I had family members who could help with this. And other people who are talking to me about, my family members are not helpful. I actually am jealous of the people who don't have any siblings, so they can just actually make some decisions. So it depends on your perspective. Sometimes it's easy for us to feel jealous just because somebody looks so completely happy. And at that point, we are not. That's human nature. It's something that we can control, but don't get upset with yourself for feeling it. It's going to be there. Give yourself permission to be that person. And then remember this, we tend to create phantoms. And what I mean by that is we tend to compare to one piece of this person and another piece of this person and then a different piece of that person. And so we're ending up comparing ourselves to somebody who doesn't actually exist. We're comparing to the best of what we see of others. And because we don't see behind and underneath, we don't know what their weaknesses are. We think, oh, I would love to be that person because she so obviously has it together, because she's so good at this. When we compare to a composite, it's a phantom, and we'll never measure up because those people do not exist. I had a lady say to me after my husband passed away, it was a year or so, and I was at work and we were working on something, and somebody said to me, oh, I can't believe you got over your husband's death so fast. It took me 5 years. And it was kind of like, lucky you. And I remember looking at her and thinking, you know this much of me. You have no idea of what's going on. You've just compared to this much of me in this context. And if you only knew. So be careful with comparisons. Give yourself permission to feel jealousy, and then recognize that you're not seeing the whole picture of who that person is and what things they struggle with. You're only seeing something that you feel inadequate in at the moment and have decided they're better at. Look for small things to be thankful for. This is something we're told a lot, and it seems like such a little thing, but it's such a huge thing. Sometimes it just, going back to shifting perspective, sometimes reframing happens when we just shift something over just a little bit, and then the picture looks different. One of my daughters was saying recently, she and I were having a conversation about an issue that she was having with friends. And, in the course of the conversation, I just said, well, maybe you need to think of it this way. Maybe it's, and I kind of went through, and a couple of weeks later, she said, you know what, Mom, that actually made all the difference, because when I could see it that way, then some of the other pieces fell into place. Look for small things that you can be grateful for. You don't need to be grateful for everything. There are things you can't be grateful for, but there are things you can. Look for them, write them down, treasure them. And then forgive yourself and find the people that reinforce you being real. Forgive yourself for the things you think you shouldn't be. Let it go and find those people that say to you, exactly, that's exactly right. You don't need to be everything all the time. Give yourself permission to feel grief. There are losses going on for you all the time, and they are very, very real. There is a difference between self-pity and grief. And many people are suspicious of their grief because they never want to be that self-pitying person. But the two are not the same thing. Self-pity is when you are really self-absorbed with your own difficulties. Self-pity is something we wallow in. And you feel like it's all about your difficulties. That's self-pity. One of my daughters was talking about somebody that she knows, and she said, this person has made it an absolute art form to make everything about themselves in a negative way. That is self-pity. But grief is a natural response to the emotions one feels when someone loses something or someone that they love. It's natural. You're going to feel that loss. You're going to feel grief. And there's a reason for it. You aren't feeling sorry for yourself. You are feeling grief at real and profound loss. So people find different ways of dealing with grief. Some people write things down. Some people like to talk it out in a group. But everybody needs to find something that's an outlet without apologizing for it, without thinking, but there's so many things I need to be doing. I shouldn't be taking this time to write down my feelings. There's so many things that I need to be doing, and there's so many needs. I don't need to be talking to somebody about my needs. Everybody has something they're dealing with. I don't need to burden somebody else with what's happening to me. You do need to find the things that work for you. It's important. And it's worth it for everything that you're doing. Also, feel free to ignore anyone who diminishes your grief. If somebody says things to you like, at least they're still with you. At least you have time. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Feel free to ignore them because they're trying to make themselves feel better and they have very little to do with how you're feeling. And if there's a good piece in there, take it out and go with it, but feel free to ignore them. You do not need to internalize those messages because they are not acknowledging the real depth of what you are dealing with. Feel free to admit how exhausted you are. Sleep? What's that? I remember talking to a lady whose husband had gone into personal care. And she said to me, and I'd known them for 2 or 3 years at that point. She said to me, I had no idea how completely exhausted I was. She said, I bet I slept almost nonstop for 3 weeks. And if you had met this lady and you were comparing, you would have said, there is one strong, strong caregiver. And she was, but she was also exhausted. She was exhausted beyond belief. Sleep is a necessity, not a luxury. Why is it important for caregivers to know that? Because you are responding to so many things and sometimes day and night and more at night than you would like, that it becomes kind of a, oh, well, this is, you know, I'm a caregiver. I'll sleep when I can. Let people who are asking you what you need know that you need sleep. Sometimes more than somebody making a meal and bringing it over, you could use somebody to come over at a time when you could lay down for a nap, knowing things are under control and just solidly sleep. And that is not a bad thing to ask for. That is not a selfish thing to ask for. That is something that is actually a really important thing to ask for. And if possible, build in some kind of respite in some form earlier rather than later. If there is any lesson that I have learned from walking with people in this journey, it's our tendency to say, I'll get help when I need it, but I'm okay for now. It's tough, but I'm making it. But realistically, you are probably more on edge than you realize. Respite is not easy to get into place. Start sooner rather than later, because it will be better for you all in the long run. It is a bit of our nature to push ourselves till we can no longer go on. I just recently went through a hip surgery, and one of the things I had to weigh was that there were a few people who thought I didn't need the surgery yet because I was still walking okay. There were a whole bunch of other things that were happening, but I realized that if I did it sooner rather than later, I would have a whole stretch of life where I could get back the movement I've lost and keep the movement I had. And then it was better to do it sooner than when I had zero other choices. It's a little bit different, but it's kind of similar. You need to put into place those things that will support you before you're desperate for them. And if that time has passed, then even more important for you to talk to people about, how do I get this in place? This is not selfish. Getting help is not selfish. If that isn't one of the things that we tell ourselves that is just extremely detrimental, I don't know what it is. It is not selfish to make sure that we're okay. Taking care of, that's my segue into taking care of yourself, is important. It is the most unselfish thing you can do as a caregiver. Let me repeat that for you. Taking care of yourself is the most important thing you can do as a caregiver. What? No, I'm secondary here. The other person's the primary. You know what? True, except that if you are not able to be there, they will lose the person who cares about them the most. And so it's vital for their sake as well as yours that you take care of yourself. There might be somebody who can have a better conversation with them on given points in a given day. There might be somebody who seems to do better at caring for them in a practical, physical sense, but there is nobody who is you for them. And if you don't take care of you, that piece will be removed. So you need to care for yourself because it's part of caring for them. When you have other people involved, when you give up some of that, I have to do this all, they get used to other people. If something unexpected happens, if you go out in this ridiculously slippery snow and fall and are in hospital waiting for surgery, they will already have other people in their world that are a part of their routine, that they know and that they trust. And that is a gift to both you if you're sitting in that hospital and them. But even if that doesn't happen, taking care of yourself means that you're doing the best you can to keep the person who cares about them the most around for as long as possible. It's easier to do things ourselves initially, but ultimately it becomes a real trap because we get more and more tired and we get more and more drained, and if we haven't built in ways to feed ourselves, then things get really fragile, sometimes a little too quickly. Your health and well-being is as important as their health and well-being. That, again, is not selfish. That is because you're a team. And if you are not taking care of part of this relationship, whether it's a partner or a parent or an aunt or a sibling or whatever, you're an important part of their world. And it's important that you take care of you. They may not be able to tell you to get help. In fact, they may be at the point where they beg you not to. But it's because they're now at a point where they can't see the bigger picture. What you're doing when you care for yourself is caring for them. And that is unequivocal. I would say that in a heartbeat to anybody, because I deeply and firmly believe it. I've seen it play out over and over and over again. Caring for yourself is part of being a really good caregiver. Now, I also don't want you to take that as a guilt thing. Oh no, now there's a whole nother thing to do. I want you to just find one of the things that maybe you've resisted or maybe you haven't thought was as important and do it. Don't take it on as another way of not living up to being an ideal. Now, this next one may surprise some of you, but look for humor. You know, caregiving is hard. And when things change so dramatically in our lives, it's hard. We need humor. We need to look for something that balances what's going on. People will say, I don't know if I should laugh or if I should cry. Many years ago, when I was a newbie social worker, I worked with a lady who was, she had worked for years in, of all things, child protection, which has got to be one of the most stressful places to be. And she was also, she was also caring for her mother-in-law who had memory issues while holding down this very stressful job. She was a woman who had just amazing perspective. And one of the things I remember was going to her office every now and then, and she would tell us a story about something that had happened with her mother-in-law. And she would describe it in a way that was just endearing and funny. Sometimes she would just have tears running down her face as she just described the stuff. And there were two things I took from that. One is it was never demeaning. It was always done with incredible love. And the other was that it was one of her ways of incorporating this into her life that wasn't a negative. She found moments to just enjoy in what they were doing, which, if you step back and look at it, was obviously very difficult. But she understood the role of humor and of just seeing life in a little different way and finding the moments and treasuring them. Because laughter brings perspective. It helps us see things. And again, laughter can be very enriching. It doesn't have to be mean or demeaning. And sometimes it's just kind of the way things get set up. When I was still working at Lindenwood, for one period, my office had a door to a hallway, and the door was often open, and so people would walk by, and I could hear their conversations. They'd say hi, and then they'd continue down the hall. And so the one day I was sitting there, and two ladies walked by, and both of them had probably mild to moderate memory issues. They were both very lovely, and they'd become really good friends. And they walked by, said hello, and continued down the hall. And then I heard the following conversation. They went to where the elevator was, and there's often posters up saying what's coming. And they stopped. And it just so happened it was actually a poster about a presentation from the Alzheimer's Society. And they stopped, and this was the conversation. One of them said, "Oh, we need to check and see what's coming." And the other said, "Yes, let's read that." "Oh, So it's about dementia. Now, what is dementia again? And the other one said, "Oh, I think that's when you can't remember things as well." "Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what it is." "Well," says the first one, "I don't need to go to that because my memory's still really very good." "Yes," says her friend, "mine is too." And then, being the absolutely sweet ladies they were, they said, "But it is really nice that they are having this for people who need it." And they walked on. A couple of their family members, I'm sure, were going to it, but it was just such a gentle irony. I just had a smile, and I just loved their whole way of sorting through it, and the fact that they were still at a place in their lives where they were so happy being who they were, and the whole thing was just fun, and funny in a very lovely way. There are moments where people will say and do things that are actually very funny, and when we can own that and acknowledge it and incorporate it, it gets rid of some of the darkness of what's going on, because we do need to treat people like they're still people. We do need to recognize that they still contribute all these wonderful and rich things to our lives. And like I said, it's not about laughing at things. It's about finding those warm moments in life that, if they did not have memory issues, we would find amusing with them, and that we can enjoy some of the things that happen and find ways of making it be something that we can hold on to as a fun thing, as opposed to seeing everything as absolute darkness. The darkness isn't going to diminish completely, but we do need humor to just give a little balance to life. When you share your stories, again, it really encourages other people to share theirs. You know what? We had a funny moment the other day, and then two people have now had a moment that brightens their day and gives them a little bit of energy to keep going. Laughter is a part of our need, and we can claim it as legitimate. It's a legitimate part of the experience, and we don't need to only go to what is difficult and dark. We can look for some of those things that just brighten life. And finally, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time addressing family issues. And I added this when I was preparing this because I was having conversations with people about some of the difficulties that come when family members don't agree on what needs to be done. So I want you to think that we are generally the least mature within our families. And what I mean by that, and this is for all of us, I'm in my 60s, and this is still true. I'm the youngest in my family. And that dynamic to some degree is still there. Now, over the years, it's lessened a bit. But my oldest brother is 7 years older than I am. And so by the time he was launching and leaving home, I was like 12 and 13. And so for many years, that is how he saw me. That was my place in his mind. We tend to kind of revert to the roles that we had in our families when we get together with family. And that's a pretty normal thing. When it comes to making decisions about difficult things, that can be something that causes some real issues. A friend of mine who was a very accomplished person on every level, when they were talking about dealing with difficulty with some of the things with his parents, he said, yeah, nobody listens to me. I'm the youngest. That's how long and pervasive it is. And so no wonder it causes some issues. We revert to the way we were before. So what you may need sometimes if you're having real difficulty coming to conclusions with siblings of the person you're caring for, or with your children, or if your children caring for somebody with other family members, you may want to consider seeing if you can meet with a neutral person, somebody who is not a part of your family dynamic, who can do a little bit of interpreting, help you hear each other, and maybe set up some new patterns within the family. That is not a waste of time. Believe me, that is something that could just stand you in really good stead. Because again, when we're stressed, we revert to old patterns in our families. That happens probably more than anywhere. Holding a family meeting might be a good thing, sometimes especially when families are separated by distance or age, or there's large numbers. The messages get garbled. So this person talks to this person and you make a decision, and then this person doesn't like it. And people, again, being stressed, their feelings get bent out of shape. Having a family meeting where you all talk about this thing together might be really worthwhile. And then you won't have sort of all the little sub conversations that can cause some real issues. If you are the only one in your family willing to talk about what's going on, and that happens for a variety of reasons, there's somebody who wants to get somebody else involved, wants to talk about it, and everybody else says, oh, no, thank you. That's not something we're doing. It can be helpful for you as an individual to just go talk to somebody about what's happening and get some perspective and get some feedback about how to handle it and grow past some of your old hurts. We need to bring our grown-up selves into these conversations, and that is easier said than done. But it is something that is really important. And sometimes I think it's helpful for people to know that this can cause some real upheaval in families, but it can also bring families through to be able to deal with other things in the future in a more positive way, because it's important enough that you meet together and add somebody and come to some conclusions. So, congratulations. You're human. You can acknowledge what you can't change and you can change the things that you do control. I hope that I'm going to acknowledge just some of my the research I did for this, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. But I hope it's giving you just some little piece along the way where you can see something a little differently, or give yourself permission to be a little more of who you are and not expect yourself to be somebody that doesn't exist. So that lists some of the places that I found information on this. I want to highlight the fact that some of what you're hearing back from me are things that I have learned from people in 30 plus years of conversations about very difficult things. And I acknowledge them because I am always deeply grateful to the people who have shared their lives with me to that extent, allowing me to take some of their wisdom and hopefully open things up for some other people. Thank you.